Welcome to another speaker's tip. A couple weeks ago, I went over the aspect of facial gestures, how to use your face to help get your point across, how effective that is. The last tip I had was on hand gestures, using your hands, using the gestures to make the point of your speech. And today I want to talk about body movement or stage movement. How do you use the stage? How do you use your body moving around the stage? A couple overall guiding points on this. One is don't move for movement's sake alone. Your movement should have the same meaning and intention as the words of your speech. Don't just wander around on stage because you want to show some stage movement, but it's not coordinated with the phrases or the concepts of your speech. We're not at this point even getting into blocking the stage, or we would call holographing the stage, putting images on the stage where you refer back to them. All I'm talking about is walking around on the stage. Let's say you're on a big stage and you want to talk to the people over at the left and you want to talk to people over at the right and you want to hit the people in the center. The point is, don't just wander around on stage. Make a statement in front of the center of the stage. And then as you move to your next statement, move to stage right as you say it and walk over and say it to the people on the right of the room. Pause for a second. Then if you want to come back across to the left, make your next statement walking across and talk to the people on the left side of the room. Stand there for a second, discuss things with them, and then move. Move to specific points and speak from those specific points. Don't just generally wander around like there's no meaning to your movement, because what you're going to communicate to the audience is the fact that there's no meaning to your movement, and it becomes a distraction. So that's the main thing. Work out where you're going to stand and say something, move someplace else, stand and say something there, move someplace else, stand and say something there. Don't just wander around. Now, the whole concept of stage movement is something I could probably spend 3 or 4 hours on. And of course, I'm not going to do that in a speaking tip. But what I wanted to share with you was an example, and the example I'm going to use is me, because this is the first speech I really worked out every movement on the stage, and every position and movement I had on the stage was there for a specific reason. And I want to share with you why I was doing what I was doing. I'm going to show you my world champion speech from 2005 and explain why I was moving where I was when I was, and how I intended for that to help convey the message. Whether it did or not, I haven't interviewed everybody that watched it. I did win the contest. I'd like to think that it had something to do with the fact that I did have effective stage movement. So let's take a look at my speech, and I'm going to walk you through this, and I'm going to show you what my intentions were as I was coming along. So I'm being introduced right here. Now, there's a specific thing I do when I'm introduced. Of course, I walk across the stage calmly, shake the hand of Johnny Uwe, say hello. Now, what I do here is I walk back to the center of the stage before I come out, because I want to start at the back of the stage and I want to walk out on the audience. I don't want to go from the corner of the stage and make a 45-degree angle to the front of the stage. I want to start from the back, and I want to approach the audience from the back center of the stage, so I'm walking out on the entire room. And I did that very specifically, practiced that very specifically.
The ultimate question.
So what happens here? I walk out, I look at the audience, and I'm at center stage, which is the most powerful speaking position you can have, center stage, and that's where I am in starting the speech. Now I'm going to flip forward a couple times here, and I pull out my ticket, and the next stage movement I have is over to what we call stage left, or the right of the stage in the audience's viewpoint. So let's take a look at this.
Do you validate? Mr. Chairman, fellow Toastmasters and friends, I was 26 years old. I was living in a small town in Indiana.
Now, if you notice, I've moved stage left, and I've taken a position front, but on the left side of the stage from the viewpoint of the stage. We call that stage left. So why did I move to stage left to make that point? I'm setting up my next movement. I'm talking about how things aren't going well in my life. I'm living in a small town in Indiana, and all the problems I'm having, and I feel like my life is going nowhere. I'm not wandering around. I'm in that location. That location is Indiana. That's where I am. Now let's move forward. Okay. And so what I'm going to do, that's a great picture, isn't it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to California.
6 months later,
Well, I got to back up. I went a little too far that time. Okay.
I felt like my life was going nowhere. So I took control. I left my home and my family, and I headed to Los Angeles to start over.
Now, if you look at that, I'm walking to the right, which is to the audience's left. And the reason that that is set up is because if you look at a map, Indiana is on your right, and you're going to move left to California. I wanted that same vision in the mind of the audience. I wanted to make sense. I was going from Indiana to California, and that is basically right to left on a map. Now, when I get to California, I stand in one location and I talk about what happens, because the image I've created in the mind of the audience now is the map. I've got Indiana over here. I've got California on the other side, and I'm not giving them a close-up of California yet. I just left Indiana. It's still over on the other side of the stage.
6 months later, I had a job I didn't like. I was dating a girl who was trying to make me better by pointing out all of my faults. And I had a couple of roommates that made Dumb and Dumber look like Einstein and Oppenheimer.
Now, I get to California, I explain what's going on. Now I'm coming out of the California scene, so I want to move to a different location because I want to take the audience out of the fact that here's what's going on in California. I'm now moving to the sort of the broader scheme of I still feel like I don't know what's going on I still feel like I'm not going anywhere in my life. So I move stage center at this point.
I had changed everything in my life, but nothing had changed. I still felt like I was going nowhere.
Now that's back at the power position on the stage, and that is the main concept I'm trying to get across right now. So I come back center stage. It doesn't matter if I'm in Indiana, if I'm in California, what's going on in my life, I still feel like I'm going nowhere. So I'm speaking from the power position at that point, and it's encompassing everything that's going on. Now the next scene does take place at stage center.
And then one day after a business meeting, all I wanted to do was get my parking validated. And I walked over to the receptionist and said, "Excuse me, do you validate?"
Okay, now if you look, I'm planting the receptionist right in that location, and that's where the receptionist stays. When I look at her, she's in that location. There's no question that that is where the receptionist is.
And she looked up and said, "Well, yes, I do. You have a lovely smile."
So I have the conversation with the receptionist, and then I want to move right through this. So I'm going to step forward. Let's see. I'm going to go back here. Okay, so take a look at this.
Catching on, I said, "You have such a keen sense of humor. I'm going to go tell your boss how lucky he is to have you out here." And she goes, "Give me that ticket." She took her little machine and she went, cha-chink. And then as she handed it back, she looked at me and she said, "There's something special about you." I took the ticket.
Now here I say I took the ticket and I headed for the elevator. Now I said this was stage center. It's a little bit stage right of center. And so the longest distance on the stage is to what we would call stage left. So I start to move over to stage left as I head for the elevator. And I imagine I put an elevator that I'm walking towards. The receptionist is behind me. I want that space out there. But there's another reason that I'm moving to stage left, which is I'm setting something up.
Getting headed for the elevator. But I stopped. I turned around and just said, "Thank you."
See, I want that thank you to go clear across the stage to the receptionist. So I put a lot of space between me and the receptionist so I could say thank you. And the audience could see the distance that went. Now, the other thing I do is I have a couple of realizations here. I'm going to go back here. and I'm going to go back home to see my roommates.
I'd validated somebody else. I wanted to do that. I wanted to make people feel good. But I felt that I needed to be important. I needed to be successful so that when I said something to somebody, it meant something to them. But that receptionist had just made my day. Heck, she made my month. With one little cha-chink, she stamped my ticket.
Okay, now if you notice, I was stage center when I was making those important points. And then I drift back off stage left as I'm setting this up right now. I wanted to do that. You know, with one little cha-chink, she stamped my ticket. I'm stage left. Why am I stage left right now?
And I thought, I can do that. So I went home to see Dumb and Dumber.
So what I do here is I go right back to the exact same spot that I went from Indiana to Los Angeles on. That's where Dumb and Dumber was. That's where my roommates were. That had been set up earlier. So when I go back to the exact same spot that I went to before to go home to see my roommates, that was in the mind of the audience. And so that made complete sense to them. And I also, instead of saying I went home, I actually went home. I walked across the stage to go home. So I used the stage to communicate. I'm going home to see my roommates. Okay. Now there's three things. I have roommates, a girlfriend, and my job. And that's a whole other combination on triads I want to share with you. But watch, I'm going to talk to my roommates. I'm going to go see my girlfriend, and I go across to stage left again and see my girlfriend. Then I come back to stage center to see my boss. So as I'm going with each one of them, and I'm showing the movement as I'm going around seeing people, I'm moving to different locations on the stage.
These guys were constantly bringing people back to the apartment. It was driving me nuts. But I went in and I said, you make friends faster than anybody I've ever seen. And that is a gift. To see their faces, I swear they got smarter right before my eyes. Cha-chink.
Okay, now I'm going to go see my girlfriend. I'll move stage left.
I went to see my girlfriend. And I thanked her for caring enough about me that she wanted to see me be as good as I could be. You know what? She got nicer. Cha-chink. I went to work and I thanked my boss for hiring me. He'd done me a favor. And I started to enjoy my work a lot more.
Okay, so I went to work, I had another location there. Okay, so you can see how I'm using the stage, but if you also watch, I'm not looking at the stage. I'm looking at the audience. My attention's on the audience, but I've worked out my stage movements to know where I need to go. So I don't have any attention on where I need to be. I don't want to wind up on the wrong side of the stage and the gesture doesn't make any sense. So especially with that speech, all that was worked out beforehand. So I knew it, and I knew exactly where I was going to go. I knew exactly how my head needed to be turned when I was talking to the receptionist and I was looking back and forth, because I had worked that out with people in the audience coaching me to say, that doesn't make any sense. That gesture did not make sense. And that's how I learned how to do it. So hopefully that gives you some insight into stage movement, and also what we call blocking the stage or holographing the stage. You can see how we put certain scenes at certain locations on the stage. And then if we're referring back to that scene in the speech, we go back to that location because we put that there with the mind of the audience. The audience has that located on the stage. So I go back to that location. Just like I went from Indiana to Los Angeles, I had a couple of roommates named Dumber and Dumber. After the meeting with the receptionist, I'm in a hotel, or I'm in an elevator in the lobby. I'm having a realization. I go home to see my roommates. I go back to that same exact location. So hopefully that gives you some insight into effective stage movement. It's not something that comes natural, at least to me. I had to work on it, and I still have to be very conscious of where I want to be. The more you do, as with anything, the more natural and the more competent you become at it. But this is a skill I had to develop, and hopefully this gives you some insight into where you can start sort of working and looking at your stage movement and seeing what makes sense. Again, the importance of getting a video of yourself and looking at it so you can see how you look from the audience's perspective is critical. The other thing I would say is just having extremely competent people around you to give you feedback. Don't get feedback from incompetent people. what I discovered is you get incompetent feedback. I don't know how that works, but it seems to always have a corollary there. Okay, those are my tips for today. I'll see you next week.